George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain candidate, 12,003. I do hereby declare that George Galloway is duly...
Dear Starmer, this is for Gaza. Do I respect the Prime Minister? I despise the Prime Minister. Just suck it up. I won the election.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The red heifers are being prepared more later. And who was that cool black dude, soft shoe shuffling up Downing Street last week? And why was he there? And why is not a single British journalist remotely interested in why he was there? The United States government is working hard, might and main, to work out how a boat managed to hit the pillar, the prop of a bridge in Baltimore, but has not yet been able to ascertain what exactly happened and why, but was able to tell us within hours of the mass murder in a theater in Moscow exactly who did it and who didn't do it. And why did Rishi Sunak take away my mantle as the greatest threat to British democracy and hand it to the Chinese? Ah, the ignominy of it. Stay tuned, this is really going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
But first, kerpow! The British government just gave £1.5 billion of your money to Ukraine. That's not my graphic, that's their graphic. The British government published that graphic today, imagining that there would be much rejoicing in the land amongst the people who've just endured a long, cold, wet, and for many hungry winter, are supposed to rejoice that the British government gave away £1.5 billion of their money to the Zelensky regime in Kiev. And they're so proud of it, the Foreign Office website is topped with not Make Britain Great, not Britain First, not We're working for you. No, it's in a foreign language, Slava Ukraina. Above that graphic, straight out of a comic, a action hero, action man comic. This shows you how out of touch the British government and the teat-sucking suckers in the British media who live on what comes out of that teat really are. They imagine that in a country where people choose between heating and eating, where pensioners are in poverty, where fuel poverty is everywhere, where millions of our children are living in official poverty in Britain, where workers are on low wages, suppressed year after year after year, where prices are rising, where interest rates are crippling, where energy costs are backbreaking, that in such a country, people will be glad that David Cameron, Lord Snooty, the unelected Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs in Britain, gave away all that money that belonged to them. Can you imagine what could have been done just with this latest tranche of 1.5 billion? How many potholes could have been filled in? How many people could have been kept warm? How many youth clubs could have been reopened, all shuttered up all over the land? How many community facilities? How many public buildings? How much of the public realm? How much of the National Health Service could have been restored, saved as a result of that 1.5 billion pounds? But you gave it to Zelensky. Now, not you directly, but the politicians you elected directly gave it. And those politicians do this because they think that you'll go on voting for them anyway. The Uni Party, the two cheeks of that clenched buttock that is the British political system, they think that they can spend our money on war after war after war, war in the Red Sea, war in the Persian Gulf, war in the South China Sea, war in the Ukraine. They think that you will go on allowing them to write these checks, to send these assets that could be guarding our own coasts, but are in fact guarding and threatening other people's coasts. They think that you will continue to vote for them, setting fire to other people's countries whilst unable to keep our own pensioners warm in the winter time. And it's down to you. If you keep electing them, they will, of course, continue to do what they have always done. It's the definition of madness to believe that doing the same thing over and over again may lead to a different result. Einstein, not me. Now, we have so much to talk about tonight. I must press on. Who was that black guy padding up Downing Street, soft shoe shuffling in his suede loafers just the other day? I recognized him immediately as the chefless Barack Obama. Bathhouse Barry, they used to call him in Chicago. I recognized him immediately, but none of the British media appear remotely concerned about why, unannounced and unexplained, the former president of the United States of America was meeting political and security officials inside number 10 Downing Street. I'm very worried about it. Last time Barry came to Britain, it was to interfere in our Brexit referendum. You may recall. He gave a speech written in Britain because it said, if we vote for Brexit, we'll be at the back of the queue for a trade deal with the United States of America. And Americans famously don't use the word queue. He was uttering a speech written in London, but he'd been drafted in because the stakes were high. And as many people believe, I'm one of them, that he is actually the Wizard of Oz who runs the Biden administration. All the signs to me are that Biden is not fully in control even of his own bowel movements, never mind a nuclear-armed superpower, the mightiest country in the world. So somebody must be running the country, and I believe that somebody is Barack Obama. So why was he here? And more importantly, why does not one single British journalist give a toss about why he was here. I'm going to hazard a guess as to why he was here. I'm going to say it had something to do with Ukraine, or it had something to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict, or it had something to do with the conflict between the West, not NATO, because most of the NATO countries have bailed out of this one, the conflict in the Red Sea against the poor but brave people of Yemen. It was one of those things. He didn't come to sing croon Sam Cooke at them. He came on an errand, on a mission. And it is a sign of the sunken depravity of what passes for journalism in Britain today that not a single British journalist has attempted to find out why Obama was here. The examples of that depravity are so numerous, I literally could run the whole show just adumbrating them. We had another one today. This pervert, I'd never heard of him, this pervert, P. Diddy, the feds raided his house in Florida. He's on the lam, apparently, in his private jet. I don't know what he's being accused of, beyond that it's some class of depravity or other. I've no idea if the allegations against him are true or not. I just know that he's run away to try and avoid justice and the feds. What I do know is that I saw a picture in the British press today where this pervert, P. Diddy, is pictured with his arm around Ginger, Prince Harry. And Harry's in the frame. He's not actually in the story in any way. He's not in the charges, if there are to be any. He's not alleged to have done anything wrong. He was just once in a frame with P. Diddy. Now, I thought when I looked at it, Ginger's in trouble here. This could be an Epstein moment. Until I saw on social media, of course, the whole picture. And at the edge of the actual picture is Prince William, the anointed one. Prince William, he of such even temper, he of such sober ways. He's in the picture with the pervert, P. Diddy, and Ginger Prince Harry. But the British newspapers cut Harry out of the picture. It doesn't suit their narrative, you see, for William to be in a picture that might prove embarrassing. How about that then? That's, of course, only one of 1,000 examples that I could give you, some of which include ourselves. I was contacted by a now online, shall I call it a newspaper? An online publication called The Independent. And asked if I had given an interview to a Russian newspaper. They gave me the name of the newspaper and asked me, had I been paid for giving that interview to a newspaper? Now, leave aside that I didn't even know you could get paid for giving interviews to newspapers. I had never heard of this Russian newspaper. I never gave them any interview. I have never given an interview to any Russian newspaper. And the Independent's owned by a Russian whose father was the KGB resident in London. Don't ask me how I know that, or I'd have to kill you. The KGB resident is the joint owner of The Independent, whose journalist wrote a very, very long, I fell asleep during the reading of it, witch hunt attack on me, in which it was in his mind, though never made it to the page, that I had A, given this interview, and B, might have been paid for it. I pointed out to him, Archie, his name was, it's you who was getting paid by the Russians. Well, a Russian is now a member of the House of Lords, as it happens, and he's best buddies with Boris Johnson, as it happens. And Boris Johnson used to slip his MI6 security detail to go and stay at the apparently luxurious residence of that Russian owner of the Independent. This is how low these people are. A journalist receiving payment from a Russian newspaper magnate attacks me for not giving an interview to a Russian newspaper and alleging that I might have been paid for it. All that happened, as the discerning viewer would quickly ascertain, was that the speech I gave in my monologue on Sunday was written down by, amongst others, this Russian newspaper. They seen it on YouTube, and they quoted it extensively on YouTube. If only I'd known I could have been paid for it. But enough of these repulsive gutter snipes who slither in the sewer in the name of British journalism. More important issues must now be dealt with. The United Nations Security Council finally passed a resolution by 14 votes to 0, with one abstention, to which I shall come, demanding an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Not a total ceasefire, not a ceasefire that will last necessarily beyond the end of Ramadan, which is more than 2 weeks, but not much more than 2 weeks. So it passed a resolution demanding a ceasefire. It's mandatory, by the way, despite what some have tried ludicrously to claim. When the Security Council passes a resolution, it is mandatory on the subject of that resolution to comply with the decision of the United Nations Security Council. They passed it. Nobody voted against it. But there's no ceasefire. Israel has stepped up the massacre. They are killing more people than they were killing before the resolution was passed. They're massacring people in tents in Rafah right now. They're massacring people in the Al-Shifa hospital, in a hospital right now. They're massacring people who come out to get food aid, which, amongst others, has been dropped from the sky by the aforementioned David Cameron and the British government. The British government wants credit for dropping food to starving Palestinians in Gaza, but is selling weapons to the people who then massacred the people who came out to collect the food that was landing, hopefully not upon them, because several people were killed with these crates falling on top of them. Several Palestinians were drowned trying to get to the crates, dropped into the sea. When there's thousands of aid trucks outside the gate of Rafah that could be opened, and the trucks could come in and without let or hindrance distribute the aid all through the Gaza Strip. So here's my point. Now that the Security Council has demanded a ceasefire and Israel has refused to comply, what happens next? And if nothing happens next, then what is the point of the United Nations Security Council? What is the point of all the money we spend on it if it can pass a resolution that is then completely ignored, defied, without consequence? And I got to thinking, Why single out the United Nations Security Council? What about all the other agencies, sinews of the international rules-based order? How are they doing? How is the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, doing in his investigation of the manifest war crimes, crimes against humanity, plausibly including the ultimate crime of genocide? How is he doing? Mr. Khan, his name is. He's British. Mr. Khan. He's the head prosecutor of the ICC. He has not even published an indictment, an arrest, made a charge. Never mind bringing anybody to justice in The Hague. He has not charged a single person in 6 months of carnage, which his colleagues also in The Hague at the International Court of Justice have said is plausibly genocide, and sent Israel for trial on the crime of genocide. And whatever happened to the International Court of Justice? I may have been dreaming, but I am sure that by a huge landslide majority, the ICJ sent Israel for trial, required a report from Israel within 30 days as to how they were complying with this ruling, and ordered Israel to stop killing Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Did Israel stop? No, they redoubled the killing in Gaza. Did the ICJ do anything about it? No, nothing at all. Which all vindicates what I said at the time when the ICC was founded. That these agencies, these apparatus pieces of the so-called rules-based order are just lipstick on a pig. The pig is the war pig of NATO and Western imperial power, war after war, war throughout the world, but you've got the lipstick that you can put on to pretend that it's all so civilized. But when push comes to shove, the lipstick is washed off, wiped off, smeared off, and the killing goes on and on and on. Now, do you remember that guy, Barbecue, eating a human being in an act of cannibalism on the news in Haiti just the other week? No, I don't either. I just recall that some people said so. But then, as Malcolm X said, if you're not careful, the media will have you hating the oppressed and loving the oppressors. Nowhere more true than in the story of Haiti. Coming up with the one and only Dan Cohen after this short break. Stay tuned. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiot isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A record poll is not just in the offing, it's actually now easily the record poll of all polls in the mother of all talk shows. 59,692 people have voted on this question. Who was behind the Moscow attack? ISIS or Ukraine? Who was behind the Moscow attack? ISIS or Ukraine? You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on Twitter, X, on YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. And as I say, right in front of my eyes, now 60,000 people have voted. If you want to call the show, it's toll free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. In the UK or Ireland, it's free of charge. 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 44203 966 2625. That's 44203 966 2625. Now, Dan Cohen is not just a journalist, he's in the very Premier League of journalists and analysts and broadcasters. But he likes to be called a journalist, and he can be found at Uncaptured News. And he likes you to watch his films too, and as one who's watched them, I can tell you, he's always worth watching. He's Dan Cohen, and he joins us now. Dan, thank you for joining the mother of all talk shows again. I want to talk to you about Haiti, which we covered quite intensively a couple of years ago, maybe a little less, and then it moved out of the news, but it's right back up there, especially in your country of the United States. If you'll forgive the pun, what's cooking there?
Well, that cannibalism disinformation campaign that you referenced earlier was part of just that, a disinformation campaign to pave the way for a military invasion of Haiti that the United States for about 3 years has been seeking to orchestrate, and now the Washington's desire to see this go down is at really a fever pitch. Now we're seeing op-eds in the Washington Post and the Financial Times calling for a direct U.S. military invasion of Haiti. And I use the term invasion and not intervention because nobody in Haiti has agreed to this, has asked for a foreign military or foreign force to come into their country. It's completely illegal. There's no basis for it. And the figure who the U.S. wants to take out is who you referenced before, Jimmy Cherizier, whose nickname is Barbecue, the former police officer who has revolutionary aspirations and is trying to change his country for the better. And so naturally, that's who the U.S. wants to eliminate.
What could possibly go wrong, Dan? We've been through this play before, haven't we?
Well, repeatedly, the U.S. has invaded Haiti, violated its sovereignty countless times through history, I think 5 times in the last century. And the UN intervention lasted for 13 years from 2004 to 2017. So it was just 6-7 years ago that foreign forces, military forces, pulled out of Haiti, and now the U.S. wants to send them back. But this time, I think it would be much worse than it was before. I mean, the track record of what happened in that period under the MINUSTA occupation was horrible. Massacres, rape of children. There are now fatherless children in Port-au-Prince who were born by children. There was a cholera outbreak that killed many thousands of people, and that was all under the purview of the United Nations. Those were blue helmets. Now the United Nations Security Council has given its blessing to a force that the United States is orchestrating, led primarily by Kenyan police forces. Now, the Kenyan police forces are notoriously brutal. A 2009 United Nations report by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights found the existence of death squads in the Kenyan police, and those have basically been reshuffled every couple of years ever since, and they still exist to this day. So, to combat supposed gang violence in Haiti, the United States proposes to send much more violent gangs and, in fact, death squads that would operate with total impunity to basically kill a popular leader.
Now, what they call death gangs, you call revolution. So help our viewers with this. Tell us about this fellow nicknamed Barbecue, what he's done, what social forces are behind him, and what his program for that revolution would be.
Well, basically, Barbecue is a former police officer. He was in an anti-gang unit in the Haitian National Police, and the United States wanted to destabilize the government of President Jovenel Moïse back in 2019 because he was starting to turn away from the unipolar U.S.-led order. So basically, they took an incident that Barbecue was involved in as a police officer, and there was a firefight between the police and a criminal armed group in which people were killed. It went awry. However, the principal NED-funded human rights group in Haiti suddenly called this a massacre, and the disinformation machine went along with it, rolled out, and started smearing him. That pushed him out of the police, and he basically dedicated himself to revolution at that point. And so he defended his neighborhood from criminal armed groups. He expelled rapists and kidnappers and the like, and began to basically tell the different neighborhoods that had armed groups, that had weapons, and even the ones that had criminals that he was battling against, let's stop fighting and let's join forces in order to have a revolution against the oligarchs that give us these weapons and give us this ammunition to kill each other. And so he's been trying to do that for years, and all these years, and we show it in the documentary, Another Vision, which you can see at anothervisionhaiti.com, all this time as he's fighting very fierce battles against criminals from the lower classes. He's trying to basically unite all of them. And so finally, he successfully did that. And that is the group called Vive Ensemble, is a coalition of armed groups, some of which are involved in criminal activity and some of which are completely against criminal activity, like Barbecue. And that Vive Ensemble coalition was able to, when the de facto prime minister, Ariel Henry, the U.S. puppet, went to Kenya on February 27th in order to sign a bilateral agreement to have this Kenyan force come into Haiti. This armed group coalition went and attacked the airport so he could not return, and they basically forced his resignation. So all of a sudden, these armed groups that have a spotty record, and some of which have actually terrorized the population, as they suddenly got rid of this puppet prime minister. And so the masses see basically that this armed group, this armed coalition, has accomplished the immediate demand of getting rid of the puppet. And so now the U.S. wants to bring the forces in to kill him. And one last point, you asked about his social program. Well, if you go into Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier's neighborhood of Lower Delma, you will see that there is no trash on the ground, unlike the rest of Port-au-Prince. You will see there is clean water. There is food for people to eat. There is security. You can walk around at any time at night and be perfectly fine, unlike the other neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince. So really, he has a revolutionary program in his neighborhood that he wants to extend throughout the country.
And will this new invasion, for that's what it would be, will this new invasion be contested by these armed groups? And will we therefore have a state of war with the Kenyan police fighting for the West?
Well, Jimmy Cherizier Barbecue has pledged that he would fight these Kenyan death squads in the event that they come in, or any other foreign force, to the last drop of blood, because he says we have Dessalines' blood in our veins. Dessalines being the founding father of Haiti, and so there's no doubt that it would be a very fierce battle. It would be very bad for everyone involved, for all parties involved. It would be a bloodbath. It would not go well for these Kenyan forces who do not speak Creole. They don't know the language. They, of course, don't know the lay of the land. And they are, frankly, at this point, the United States has only been able to come up with 400 Kenyan forces because they have such a criminal record among them. And so it's a very small force at this point, and Washington is running out of options. And that's why we see in the last 2 days these op-eds in the Washington Post and the Financial Times saying that the U.S. just has to do it directly. So there have been, I would say, unconfirmed reports of some kind of U.S. military presence off of Haiti's coast. But soon the U.S. is going to seek, one way or another, to get some kind of military force into Haiti to stamp out this alliance of armed groups led by Jimmy Cherizier.
And what first attracted the American empire to the poor little place called Haiti?
Well, I mean, if we go back, to the Haitian Revolution, really, so the 1791 to 1804 revolution is when it finalized. And the United States always basically saw this revolution of slaves as a threat. And there were Haitians involved, Haitian revolutionaries involved in slave uprisings in the United States and throughout the Americas. And ever since, the United States has sought to subdue Haiti, including a 34-year occupation beginning in 1915, when the United States Marines went into Haiti and simply stole its gold reserves from the central bank, and it has imposed dictatorships, coups d'etats, neoliberal economics on Haiti ever since, in order to keep it down and prevent Haitians from actually benefiting from their own labor and from the riches of their own country, of which there are many. And so that is basically the equation that exists today.
Are they afraid of another Cuba?
Absolutely. You can imagine that State Department planners here in Washington, D.C. are terrified of the idea of a twin revolutionary island nation just east across the Windward Passage from Cuba, because, of course, there could be some kind of effect with other countries too. Imagine what could happen in the Dominican Republic or in Puerto Rico, where there's a strong independence sentiment among its nationalist sector, and Venezuela is just to the south. So the idea of the United States losing another neocolony in Latin America and the Caribbean is terrifying, especially in the era of the new Cold War with China, in which the United States is pulling its sweatshops. U.S. corporations are pulling their sweatshops out of Southeast Asia, out of China, and relocating them back into the Western Hemisphere, and sees Haiti as the place that it can exploit the most. And it is traditionally, for decades, has been the place where the U.S. has enforced the lowest wages, the most brutal exploitation, and it wants to maintain that in order to keep cheap products coming into the United States.
Remind us, Dan, where can people see your film on Haiti?
It is. I've just uploaded it to a site called AnotherVisionHaiti.com. So if you just go to AnotherVisionHaiti.com, all 3 episodes are linked there. The site is very basic. I'm going to improve it, but they're all there. You can also see it on my YouTube channel, Uncaptured Media. Also on Rumble. I've just uploaded it on Rumble to my Rumble channel, Uncaptured Media. So any of those 3 places. I think the easiest thing is AnotherVisionHaiti.com.
I'm sure we'll all be doing that. Dan Cohen, as always, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls all the way to the hour. I'm gobsmacked by this poll. I'm trying to get my head around it. See you in a minute.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. This type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
So 61,238 people have voted on tonight's poll. Who was behind the Moscow attack, ISIS or Ukraine? Now, the reason I'm bamboozled by it is on Telegram, only 6% of the voters think that ISIS did it. On the YouTube community poll, only 15% of the voters think that ISIS did it. On the YouTube stream, that's those of you watching on YouTube right now, only 8% of the people think that ISIS did it. But on Twitter, 84% think that ISIS did it. That means there has been a massive push, not just by NAFO, they don't have that kind of number. It has to involve state actors. There has been a massive attempt to hijack our poll on Twitter to point people in the direction of ISIS, which is further evidence, on top of all the other reasons why, adumbrated by me on Sunday and by many people since. It's another reason to believe that there are people out there who are desperate for you to believe that it was ISIS that murdered and maimed hundreds of people in a theater in Moscow a few days ago. They never think, these guys, you see. Let's get thousands of people voting, they say, that it was ISIS. Divert attention from Ukraine. Let's influence Galloway's poll, but only on Twitter, because we don't have the time or the resources to overwhelm the other portals on which this poll is being voted on. Is that not suspicious to you? Because if it isn't, I have a bridge here in London I could sell you going cheap, cheap, cheap. Now, remember that you can download tonight's show as a podcast. Scan the QR code on your screen right now. Apparently it works. Just put your phone up to that QR code and it takes you right to the podcast. In fact, all of the podcasts of all of the MOATS that there have ever been on television. How about that then? David is in England, in Swindon, on Israel and Russia. Can't wait. David, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the first, just on the bridge, you mentioned I could sell you a bridge. Just let me make a point on the Baltimore Bridge. I don't know what the rest of the world is seeing on their television screens, but when I woke up, it was wall-to-wall coverage, 15-minute slots on the Baltimore Bridge being hit. Yeah, but then the BBC, I can't remember, had an expert on, the so-say expert, on what's causing this, what caused it, and then they said, oh, it's it could be this. But one guy actually said it could be a third actor country who's made it crash, and he wasn't challenged. We all know what that means, don't we? He was saying it's an outside agency. Right, okay, so that's the bridge thing. But
no, before you leave that, David, before you leave that, the owner of the ship was the sister-in-law of the American war pig Mitch McConnell, Senator Mitch McConnell. She was found drowned in her car shortly before this incident happened. With high levels of alcohol in her blood, she had apparently backed her car into a pond. And then her ship appeared to sail right at the central pillar of the bridge. And the state of the bridge was so powerless that it immediately fell down. Now, I don't know if it was an accident or not, and neither does the United States. Although they knew within hours exactly who had murdered all these people far away in Moscow. Funny that, innit? Back to you, David.
Yeah, the second point was on the Russian theatre massacre. Again, going back to the UK TV, and I don't know what you rest of you guys who are listening to this, what their reporting stations are like, but they had a guy on, and he was asked his theory. This is a guy called Ben Browder. I don't know whether you know him. Ben Browder.
Bill Browder.
Bill Browder, yeah. Anyway, totally impartial. Going through he was asked and his top favourite, he mentioned a few, he said it was the Russians that did it themselves. It was Russian agents that stormed the theatre, and it was Russian agents that killed because it's a false flag operation. And he also said they were given warnings.
For what?
For what purpose?
Operation for what, David?
Exactly. Yeah. A false flag operation.
Well, of course, that particular vile, foul calumny didn't survive long. It survived about an hour and a half. About an hour and a half, when the bodies were still not cold, all the Western capitals and all their teat-sucking, servile sycophants in the Western media had all decided it was ISIS. Not just ISIS, special kind of ISIS. ISIS-K, special K. ISIS-K that swear the Shahada with their left hands, their dirty hand. special kind of Islamists that have got an ISIS sign behind them, so puerile, a small child who didn't speak Arabic could, maybe did, paint it. A special kind of Islamist fanatic who didn't commit suicide by bombing himself, who didn't fight to the death, who killed all these innocent people, then ran away. Where? To Ukraine. Very special kind of ISIS, this Khorasan, funded by a man who was part of the governing apparatus of the American military base of Bagram in Afghanistan. A former United States employee, senior employee. He's the commander of Special K ISIS. Now, I happen to believe that Ukraine did it. And if Ukraine did it, then everyone who makes possible what Ukraine does has that blood on their hands. But if it was ISIS-K, then that raises a bigger question. Who are ISIS-K? Who are they? Who set them up? For what? Who arms them? Who gave them the money to pay these mass murderers? Hundreds of thousands of rubles. Who is ISIS-K? That's perhaps an even more interesting pond into which we should explore. Thanks, David. There's a legend on the line. It's Sarkar in Glasgow. Go ahead, Sarkar.
George, thank you once again for taking my call and being the voice of truth. George, it's a very serious question. Julian Assange trial is going on. Yes, it's a small victory for every like-minded, sane-minded people that he has not been extradited to that hellhole of a prison in USA. But there's always a caveat with these US-backed lawyers, you know. They have been given 3 weeks to come back and say, oh, we'll take them back over there in USA, but he would not be killed, there would be no death penalty for him. George, you know what I worry? Yes, I know, so far we have stopped him from going there, but what if after 3 weeks they come back with something and say we won't kill him, and he's sent to the US? We all know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Nobody kills them in the jail, they suddenly commit suicide. If our courts believe in that US document or whatever they bring after 3 or 4 weeks and do extradite him into that horrible prison, what are the chances of that man coming out alive? Over to you, George.
Well, my view on it, and I was hoping to embrace my friend Julian Assange yesterday, but that will have to wait. My view on it is this. They want to kill Julian Assange for the crime of truth-telling, for the crime of revealing the crimes of the people who now hold him and who may soon hold him. They want to kill Julian, but not yet. They don't want to kill him in a presidential election year. They don't want the embarrassment of a big trial of a journalist in America when Joe Biden's already in very serious trouble with his own voting base. Only 18% of Democratic voters, for example, support Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip. 18. Biden is in deep trouble amongst young people, amongst progressive people, amongst liberal people. He's in deep trouble amongst the minority ethnic building blocks of the Democratic Party's coalition. The last thing in the world he needs is a Julian Assange trial in Virginia in the run-up to a presidential election. So they would like to kill him, but not yet. And that is the stated position of the insiders frequently quoted coming from the White House. The unstated position of the British authorities is whatever you say, sir. If you want us to send them, we'll send them. If you don't want us to send them, we won't send them. We'll keep them rotting, wasting away in Belmarsh prison for 5 long years in a super penitentiary outside London, southeast of London. We'll do it for you, sir. You just tell us when you want him. And the establishment stooges who perversely gave the verdict they gave yesterday will be examined in detail by the Honourable Craig Murray, our guest on the show tonight. Now, have a look at this. My latest offering, it's a trial balloon. Let me see how many people look up at it. It's called Have It Out with Galloway. It's my new effort, my new offering, free to air to any of you to use as you please. Take a look. I'm back, not just here in the scene of many crimes, but on your screen with a brand new weekly show called Have It Out with Galloway. There'll be a panel, there'll be experts, there'll be me, but there will also be you joining me as a studio audience online. Have a go. Why don't you, if you think you're hard enough? Now, it will be on all platforms, but it's only on YouTube right now. So after this show, if you're interested, go and watch it. Have It Out with Galloway. And if people like it, I'll do it again. Tell me what you think. Shemer is in Canada and wants to talk about Palestine. Shemer, welcome.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Galloway. It's Shaima, S-H-A-I-M-A. Anyways, I just want to say congratulations on your Rochdale landslide win. Also, I'm calling today because I just heard... Thank you. I heard about a tax revolt going on in the UK called No Tax for Genocide campaign. What I understand is that it's a coalition of international lawyers that make the case that under international law, no country, company, or individual is to fund genocide. People might think it's about not paying taxes. However, no, it's not. It's all the taxes that will be put in a trust account. And the only way the UK government can get those taxes is once it provides clear evidence that this is not going to fund or arm a genocide. So I think this could be a game changer. And also I want to look, because I only heard about it today, so I'm going to look into it if we can have something similar in Canada. So I hope people or businesses in the UK can look up No Tax for Genocide campaign.
Well, thank you, Shaima. My apologies for mispronouncing your name. I don't think it will be a game changer. I don't think many people will do it. But of course, it is a legitimate method of nonviolent direct action. But it would be imperative that people put the money into a trust. And I could not be a party to encouraging people to break the law by withholding their taxes, running up big debts to the tax authorities, and possibly putting themselves into quite serious trouble as a result. You only heard about it yesterday. I'm only hearing about it right now. So if I'm only hearing about it right now, it's clearly not yet, at least, a game changer. Sorry to disappoint. Comments on the first hour. James Anthony Ward about the 1.5 billion from the British government. Karpow, Batman. Says, the 1% need it, it won't go to Zelensky. It will be given to the arms factories that they own. And Ian McKillop says, the men who died on that bridge were filling in potholes, which gives you some idea of the state it must have been in. The collapse was due to chronic underfunding in essential maintenance. And Sprinks says, if you repeat a lie often enough, eventually it becomes Israel. Anthony Lombardi says, laws consist of ink on paper. Actions, especially actions of certain governments, are quite another piece of cake. Indeed so. Now, after the break, the young version of myself, a superstar, Jackson Hinkle, who this very week, if not this day, became the man with the biggest Twitter following that I have ever known. He is up right after the break. Jackson Hinkle, the US-based political analyst and host of The Dive. I promise you, you don't want to miss him. Keep voting on the poll. Even though they attempted to rig it, they failed utterly, miserably. Imagine how they must feel to hear me saying that. After all that effort, all that expenditure, who knows? Who paid? Probably you paid. I'll be right back after a very short break with the one and only Jackson Hinkle. Stay tuned.
George, I'm just looking at another dimension in this Gaza war conflict. Could this be a religious conflict in the guise of it's not Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism, but an ideology, a Zionist ideology, in establishing their leader that is supposed to come in the future, and they will then govern and rule?
It's in their ideology, for sure. The Zionists are no more and no less than a nationalist ideology. They have nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Anybody who thinks Netanyahu is religious hasn't looked too closely into his private life. These people are extreme nationalists, exceptionalists. Some Americans believe in American exceptionalism. Zionists believe in Jewish exceptionalism. Nobody, in truth, is exceptional. There's nothing religious about it. It's about land. It's about nationalist supremacy, ethno-religious supremacy on the land of Palestine. And the Europeans colonized Palestine in the same way that the Europeans colonized South Africa. So fitting, the victims of white European colonialism are coming to the aid of other victims of white European colonialism. And they're doing the whole world a signal service.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Who was behind the Moscow attack? ISIS or Ukraine? You can vote now on my Telegram, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. 61,843 people have already voted. Jackson Hinkle is one of the brightest stars in the firmament. I think he's back in the United States, but he has been spending time around the world, in the Arab world, in Russia. He's garnering a worldwide reputation as well as a world view that is practically second to none, certainly in the United States. And I'm glad to say he's back with us now on the mother of all talk shows. Jackson, my condolences to the American people on the tragedy in Baltimore. It either looks like the BaltimoreBridge was in such a parlous state that it folded like a cheap tent, killing the workers that were on top of it, and I don't know, maybe even some motorists that were driving over it, or something more sinister. What's your take on that?
Well, I'll get to that in a second. I first want to say thanks for having me on the show again, and thank you for everything that you're doing in the UK, because as a young communist in America, it's very inspiring to see your victory and everything that the Workers' Party of Great Britain is doing. I'm just so happy, and I will fully endorse George Galloway for prime minister and get rid of the Zionist in office who's currently occupying it. But as for the events in Maryland, it was a travesty, of course. I find it interesting that, we as American citizens are told by our government and by the media that we are conspiracy theorists if we ask any questions about, mass devastating events like the one we saw unfold this week. The media is telling us that it was just a natural disaster. Nothing should be asked of it. Just like they're talking about the events in Moscow this week. We're not allowed to ask any questions. We're supposed to believe that ISIS was responsible. And I think that's frankly un-American. We're supposed to be able to have free speech. We're supposed to be able to ask questions about what's going down. And as you mentioned, regardless of whether there was nefarious actors involved in the collapse of the bridge, what is a sure thing is that that bridge was in a very poor state of affairs, like much of the infrastructure across the United States. And that's been one of the biggest takeaways that I've noticed in traveling across the world. You mentioned I've been in Russia, I've been in China, I've been in Morocco. Our infrastructure in the United States is abysmal, and it's insane to me that we continue to funnel money abroad to Israel, to Ukraine, and other countries when our country's in such shambles.
Now, they were not sure how this disaster in Maryland happened, but they were very sure that Ukraine was not involved in the mass murder in Moscow, and that not only Islamists, but a named Islamist group, Special K, ISIS-K, within hours, not only the governments of the West, but all of their teat-sucking, servile, sycophantic journalists were absolutely adamant that it was a crime committed by ISIS-K. And as you may not know, we're running a poll, a gigantic poll. A clear effort was made on Twitter, but not on the other platforms. They didn't realize we had other platforms where actually far more votes are cast. A huge effort was made involving tens of thousands of accounts to persuade us that it was ISIS and not Ukraine. Further evidence, you might think, of this rush to point over there at a helpful set of malcontents and murderers in ISIS. How were we so quick? How are we so sure in Western countries that this was done not by Ukraine and therefore by extension us, but was in fact done by some Tajiks who don't know the right hand from the left hand when they're swearing on the Quran and standing in front of their child's paint box ISIS banner? Why were we so sure, and for what purpose?
It's a very serious issue, but I'm laughing because it's insane that anyone would believe that these individuals who committed this terror attack were acting, on their own. There's no reason for these extremists to have committed this attack against Russia on their own. There's no cui bono, as they put it, for them to have done this. Who benefits? It doesn't make sense. The only people who benefited from this attack are the West and Ukraine. And there's ample evidence that Ukraine and by proxy, the United States were the organizers of this horrific event. I mean, the individuals who committed this attack were fleeing into Ukraine. They were caught in the Bryansk region. In addition to that, the United States has come out day after day saying and making sure that everyone knows it was not them, it was not the CIA who had any involvement in this. But we saw the Russian security services come out this week and say that Ukraine, the UK, and the United States were behind this deadly attack. So the United States and the CIA have committed tons of terror attacks on Russia, not just this year, not just last year, but for decades now. Obviously, they benefit. Obviously, they have a history of doing this. And again, I think it's important to ask questions as to who actually organized this attack. Now, you bring up the important fact that the United States has said that ISIS-K was the only group involved in this attack, and they were the ones who organized it and committed it. The only problem with that is everyone who has at least two working brain cells knows that the United States created ISIS, armed ISIS, supported ISIS, provided medical support for ISIS when the U.S. and the U.K. were operating a dirty war in Syria against Bashar al-Assad. So regardless of whether we want to take the official U.S. line or the official Russian line, it does seem as though the United States has ample culpability behind this terror attack.
Quite so. As I said earlier, it's actually even more interesting if it really was ISIS-K, because then we need to start asking, who are these people? How did they come to be? Where did they get the weapons? Where did they get the money? And why did they do this at this moment in time? The only people that have been attacked by this so-called ISIS-K are Russia and Iran, with some attempts made against China. In other words, the big three in the United States and UK's official enemy list. That's a remarkable coincidence, isn't it?
It is. And President Putin brought up that point as well. He said, ISIS generally only ever attacks the official enemies of the U.S. government. And he said, I find that very interesting. And it is interesting. Of course, we can look back to the one time when ISIS accidentally launched a missile at Israel when ISIS was fighting in Syria. And that was the only time that ISIS ever apologized to anybody, to any state actor, to any civilian population. They apologized to Israel for accidentally launching a missile at their country. When it comes to the events that you mentioned, the attack on Iran, I believe what you're referring to was the attack on the memorial procession commemorating the loss of life, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, who, of course, was a feared villain in the eyes of the official State Department and Pentagon actors. They killed him during the Trump administration. So what's very clear is that, not only are just random enemies of the U.S. being targeted by this ISIS-K group, but the most feared villains of them all in the eyes of the West are the ones who are being attacked.
Yes, an extraordinary coincidence, one of many to which I'm sure we will return. Now, you mentioned Donald Trump there. In the last few days, Biden's policy of everlasting, never-ending, bottomless support for the Israeli government and its slaughter of the innocents in Gaza has plummeted in its levels of support amongst the United States. That's evident. Only 18% of Democratic voters support what Israel is doing, which spells big trouble for Biden. But it's not just that part of America that's falling out of love with Israel, is it? We've had the extraordinary phenomenon of Candace Owens, a figure from the right, formerly of The Wire, Alex Jones, another figure from the right, Tucker Carlson, another figure from the right, and now Donald Trump warning Israel that it is losing its friends all over the world and that it has to bring this war to a speedy conclusion. That's quite a turn of events, isn't it, Jackson?
It is. And I'd also add that this morning, a new podcast between Joe Rogan and Kurt Metzger, one of the featured main guests on the Jimmy Dore show, during that podcast, Joe Rogan came out and called what is happening in Gaza a genocide against the people of Gaza. And he had some other very harsh words for Israel as well, of condemnation. I do think that it's most interesting what Donald Trump had to say. I've often referred to him as Zion Don, and others have as well, because of his longstanding deep support for Israel. But something interesting happened at the end of his presidential administration. He came out and was very upset with Benjamin Netanyahu for some reasons that I'm not sure YouTube will allow us to discuss. But he was very upset with him, and it seems as though there's been a lasting impact on Donald Trump ever since. And now you're seeing him come out and say that the world is turning against Israel. He wished that he had called Israel and told them not to do this because it was going to be very bad. He said, I've been watching all the photos and the videos coming out night after night of bombs being dropped on civilian homes. He said, this has to end. We need peace. So whether or not this is just an election ploy, I don't know. But it is definitely the correct line that needs to be taken for any candidate for any office in the federal government in the United States at this point. And he is the only one who's even coming close to taking a line of condemnation against Israel. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., full supporter of Israel. Joe Biden, same, so on and so forth with all the other candidates. Donald Trump is the only major candidate that is coming out right now and saying these things. The last point I'll make, you brought up all these right-wing names like Candace Owens, Donald Trump. I mentioned Joe Rogan. You mentioned Tucker Carlson. Don't you find it interesting that all of these individuals in the United States, and you could say yourself in the United Kingdom, were some of the most viral voices online, some of the most followed voices online? We've all thought long, hard, and critically about the events taking place in Gaza, and have come to the conclusion that there needs to be a stark condemnation of Israel. And because of that, we've all found ourselves in positions where we have to be independent online in our shows and our programs. No mainstream media outlets will ever think about hiring us, and they just fired Tucker and Candace. I think that says a lot about the state of our media and also about our governments, that no one wants to issue any condemnation of Israel.
Yes, it does, but it also speaks volumes about where the public are at, because you just became, was it 2.5 million followers you've got now on Twitter? Phenomenal number, yes. And I may even have understated it. You'll tell me, I'm sure. Tucker Carlson's numbers are exponentially greater than they were before he was fired. 3 million people watched MOATS in the last 7 days. Your numbers are rocketing. So the public are going out to look for us. And sometimes, in your case, they've got to look pretty hard for you. But they're doing it because the appetite of the public for the truth is pretty much insatiable.
Yes, and that's exactly why you just won your election, because you're willing to speak truth to power on so many issues, especially and including the issue of Gaza and what's unfolding there. I think that, of course, it shows that we are all over the target, directly over the target, considering the fact that since October 7th, I've been banned from YouTube, WhatsApp. I've been banned this week from Instagram and Facebook. Meta took my pages down with 500,000 followers. And now only can you find me on X with 2.5 million followers. I think it does show, though, like you said, that when you have a sense of meritocracy, when those who have the most rational messages who are allowed to speak freely and are not censored, they will, in fact, rise to the top, and more people will follow them. I believe you just hit 400,000 on YouTube. You're surpassed 700,000 on X. People are seeking out the truth, regardless of how difficult it is becoming to find.
Yeah, my new ambition is to catch up with you on X, but take it from me, and I mean this sincerely, my heart swelled with pride for you when I saw that number. I love you like a son. Jackson Hinkle, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. always a pleasure to have you on the show. Who was behind the Moscow attack? Was it ISIS or was it Ukraine? Well, so far, out of 63,411 votes cast, only 5% of the Telegram audience think that it was ISIS. 95% think it was Ukraine. On the YouTube community poll, only 15% think it was ISIS. 85% think it was Ukraine. On the YouTube stream, only 8% think it was ISIS. 92% think it was Ukraine. But on Twitter, it's 76% say it was ISIS and 24% say it was Ukraine. Now, if that doesn't tell you something, then I'm not sure there's much more I can do for you. Although, stay tuned, because on Julian Assange and many other things, the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, and now court reporter extraordinaire, and many other things, will tell us what happened with Julian Assange this week. Stay tuned.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Honourable Craig Murray coming up shortly. A couple of quick calls first. Mina in London on the ceasefire. Go ahead, Mina.
Hi, George. How are you? Spoke to you about 20 years ago on Press TV. I don't know if you remember
20
me.
20 years ago? Wow.
Press TV,
how wonderful.
yeah. I haven't even changed a bit. So,
I'm sure
hello?
you haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing is, I was just thinking, yes, the ceasefire, and Israel is not going to abide by the ceasefire. Why, as the peace, United Nations, peace, the army will go in and stop Israel? Why haven't we got that in place now?
Well, actually, a constituent of mine, Mr. Khan in Kingsway Ward in Rochdale, called me with this point last night. And as he made the case for it, the traditional opposition to it, in my mind, began to fall away. I'm going to ask Craig Murray about it. But if the Security Council is going to accept that it has no authority in the world, then it has no purpose. If you can pass a resolution without anybody voting against it, demanding a ceasefire, and no ceasefire happens, in fact, the killing goes up, not down, then that's begging the question across the whole world, what is the point of a Security Council? So why not a Russian, Chinese, British, French, American, multinational, United Nations force sent in to stop the killing. Why not? I'll be asking Craig that. What do you think, Mina?
It's about time, because there's too many people are dying. Children are starving. At least get some aids in, medication in. It's heartbreaking every single day.
Indeed so. Thank you for that call, Mina. Don't wait 20 years to make the next one, because I might not be here. Stephen is in London on Julian Assange. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, George. First, congratulations. I'm a bit nervous talking to you because I called you today and I sent an email to you today, and my suggestion is that Julian Assange should file a private bill in Parliament for his freedom. Now, people don't know what a private bill is. And I, by chance, having done campaigning decades ago, did a private bill. I wrote it myself. I put it to Parliament. I took it through the procedure, and it was voted on at second reading. So I'm probably the only person who really knows that this procedure exists. A private bill is an application to Parliament for powers for oneself outside the general law. It's perfectly legal, perfectly straightforward, and perfectly acceptable. Now, my theory is that Julian should propose to Parliament that what's happened to him is a gross infringement of our sovereignty, in which the United States is trying to control us. And the purpose of my framing it like that is because I think that way you attract some of the right and some of the left. One of the reasons I'm proposing that this has all gone wrong is that there was collusion between the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, in 2011, and the Attorney General under Obama, whose name was Holder. And Holder said at the time that they had considered using the Espionage Act. Now, Obama put the kibosh on that one, but Trump simply took it up. So the plan was put together by Keir Starmer and Holder, Attorney General under Obama, in 2011. I call that collusion, and how do I support it? During the ensuing 10 years, there have been 10,000 emails, 10,000 sheets of paper shared between the Director of Public Prosecutions here in the UK, the people on the other side in the US, and the Swedes. And a journalist applied for freedom of information to see those papers and was refused. She appealed twice, and on both levels of appeal, the judge said there's a custom that two countries are meant to cooperate and assist in making extraditions happen. Now, assistance means, down the corridor on the third file upwards, fill in Form X. That's assistance. This was collusion. So my theory is that it's not just a theory, it's a deep feeling of what an offense to our sovereignty, to tell you the truth. There was collusion.
No, it's a very interesting call, Stephen. Do make sure that we can get back to you privately off air. I ask you only one question on it. Julian is not a British citizen. Does that affect one's ability to bring a private bill before Parliament?
I'm laughing, because every time, since I thought this up in July, and we've been putting it to Julian's representatives for 6 months and getting no reply, I haven't answered that question. And you should probably find that Parliament is free to give whatever powers it wishes to anyone it wishes, but whether a non-citizen can apply is a question on which Parliament may wish to make an innovation. Parliament has complete freedom. It is totally sovereign, not bound by any rules, only by occasional customs, and it can do whatever it wants. I once protested during a meeting on the advice of an MP and was put in prison in Parliament in a round room made of stone for an hour. And I thought, these people can cut my head off if they want to. They have absolute power over me, and they do. Parliament is sovereign.
You're a very interesting man, Stephen. I look forward to, you're a very interesting man. I look forward to furthering this conversation and passing it on to Julian's legal representatives. They may not have responded to you, but I'm sure that they will to me. Thank you for that most interesting call, which tees up just perfectly our next guest, who is the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador and a historian as well as an activist, and perhaps most pertinently in the context of this interview, a man who's followed the Julian Assange case in all of its twists and turns. Craig, thanks for joining us, especially as you've got your arm in a sling. I'm grateful to you. I don't know if you heard that last call. The gentleman that we don't know, I don't know, Stephen in London, thought that Julian might be permitted to introduce a private bill into Parliament that would somehow spring him. One thing's for sure, while he didn't get out yesterday, you could argue that he might be on that plane to the United States in 3 weeks from now if the Americans give assurances that won't be worth the paper that they're written on, but may be enough to persuade the establishment stooges in wigs sitting on the bench. What say you?
Yeah, I think there's a long history of the United States giving diplomatic assurances which they don't keep, both to the United Kingdom and to other countries, as regards the treatment of prisoners, as regards conditions of trial, as regards charges to be brought. But the assurances will be accepted, whatever assurances are given. They're going to have difficulty giving assurances on the point of whether or not he will be allowed to rely on the First Amendment as a foreign national, because that's up to the judge. And nobody can assure what a judge is going to decide. And as Julian's defence case put forward in his application for an appeal, and as the judgment refers to, that there is a Supreme Court judgment which states that foreign nationals acting abroad, and Julian, of course, was foreign national acting abroad at the time he published these documents, are not entitled to any constitutional protections. And one of the reasons given in that Supreme Court judgment, one of the reasons given for that is that if foreign nationals acting abroad were entitled to constitutional protections, then the United States military would have to grant constitutional rights to enemy combatants with whom they were in contact. Meaning, of course, that the people in Guantanamo Bay, for example, would have constitutional rights. So that there are complex reasons why the Americans are going to be both unable and unwilling to give an assurance on the grounds of no discrimination against him on the grounds of nationality, on the grounds that he would be allowed to plead the First Amendment, because it's not by any means plain that he would be allowed to plead the First Amendment.
And the US government is not in a position to give that assurance, even if they were minded. I'm on the same page as you. I think that's by far the most onerous of the three conditions that the British judges have sent to Washington, and could actually scupper the trial, couldn't it? If they refuse to give those assurances, or at least that one assurance. The judges yesterday said that Julian would have a high chance of success in an appeal. And therefore we could, mightn't we, be coming towards the end of this long calvary of our friend Julian Assange?
It's a possibility, but I mean, so many legal points have been twisted on the way here that I don't in the least rule out they're twisting this particular point out of the way as well. What we might see is an assurance given, but simply an assurance that the prosecution will not seek to argue that he does not have First Amendment protections. But that doesn't mean that the judge won't rule it anyway. But the court may decide to accept simply an assurance that the prosecution will not seek it. And I mean, when you bear in mind But one of the things yesterday's judgment says is that it accepts that there were senior American officials, from the president down and the Secretary of State down, saying that they wanted Julian to be killed, and there were plots being hatched to plans to kidnap him or to assassinate him. But then they say, but that's okay, because if he's extradited, they won't need to kidnap him or assassinate him. Therefore, they can be trusted. When you look at the twisted logic of that, saying, well, we're putting him into their power so they won't need to kill him, as opposed to we're putting him into the power of people who want to kill him. They could well find a way to twist logic around this. I've never believed at any stage of this that any legal argument is so strong that our supine judgments won't find a way to give way to the United States.
Unless the United States doesn't actually want him back, Craig, in an election year at the very least.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think is happening here. This achieves everything that the United States wanted from this result. It keeps Julian in a maximum security prison. And as you and I are talking, Julian is there in the most terrible hellhole that is a Belmarsh prison, where both his physical and his mental health are deteriorating measurably on a daily basis. So that's achieved for them by this. It knocks everything a couple of months away. The United States want Julian dead, or if not dead, they want him in a concrete tomb, completely isolated, where he might as well be dead, where he's effectively dead. That's what their objective. But their objective is not to get there before the election, as you quite rightly say. Biden is already in huge trouble getting re-elected. The Genocide Joe label has stuck, and has deservedly stuck. Whole elements of the coalition that supports him, particularly the black and other ethnic minority votes and young people's votes, are deserting him in massive droves due to the genocide in Gaza and his active support and complicity in that genocide. And those are exactly the same people who are going to be outraged by the persecution of Julian Assange if Julian Assange appears in chains in Washington. So Biden can't afford for him to turn up. So the whole thing is being kicked further down the road. That's why they granted these very limited grounds of possible appeal. That's why they gave the United States more time. That's why we have a new timetable of several more months, which then may lead to an eventual hearing on the point we've been discussing. And that will all put it comfortably past the US election, with Julian still in maximum security prison. So that's exactly what this is all about.
May I turn in the few minutes left, and I'm grateful for your time, to your former career as a diplomat. I want to put it to you that when the Security Council demands a ceasefire, and this demand is not just ignored, but defied with an intensification of the murder of the Palestinian people, that this renders the Security Council, the United Nations, and international diplomacy in general an utterly ridiculous, pathetic, crestfallen being, doesn't it?
It does. I would have to agree with that. And you have a situation where the United States is making claims that a Security Council resolution is non-binding, which is absolute nonsense. It's just talking total gibberish in international law. As in fact both the Chinese and the Russians, and in fact more or less every other member of the Security Council apart from the United Kingdom has since said. It is just simply untrue to say a Security Council resolution is not binding. What it isn't is a Chapter 7 resolution which mandates the use of force and mandates the use of sanctions, and that has to be the next move. If the Security Council doesn't, and the whole United Nations system doesn't want to look utterly impotent, it has now to move to a Chapter 7 resolution imposing sanctions on Israel and perhaps authorizing the use of military force to bring to an end the situation in Gaza. And that will very much depend, frankly, on the role of major powers like China and Russia and being willing to push that. It will also lead to further use of the United States veto, which of course will show us exactly who is promoting and protecting Palestine. Who is promoting and protecting genocide in Palestine, and will lead to further isolation.
But it would be a stark, it would be a stark exposure indeed. Hope to see you back in Blighty, up in the northwest soon. Craig Murray, thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Craig Murray, historian, former British ambassador, human rights activist. On the line is another legend. It's Simon in Florida on the UN Security Council. Go ahead, Simon. Welcome.
Mr. Galloway, thank you for inviting me back as you did on Sunday to discuss the outcome of the meeting on Monday. And I cannot impress upon you what a perfect segue that final question and answer was with the wonderful Mr. Murray there. God bless him, and may he get elected like you to Parliament as soon as possible. But on this, my 43rd call to you, you will see that literally has biblical significance that, if time allows, I will explain at the end. But otherwise, our worldwide audience can look it up on godskingdom.org, the biblical meaning of the number 43. They will be absolutely astonished based upon what I'm now about to explain to you. So what needs to be understood is that the motion that was put forward by the E10 on Monday for the ceasefire, that was this incredibly truncated and succinct 3 operative paragraph version that drove Netanyahu into a reported tantrum in his office because he understood the significance, even if the State Department, who pre-warned him on Sunday night, did not. Okay? So it was written, or the drafting was controlled, by the nation of Mozambique on behalf of the E10, which is the 10 elected members of the United Nations Security Council. Now, the number supporting it went down to 7 to 8, and then in the end, before it was voted on, all 10 of them were supporting it. And that was the first time that a E10-sponsored motion in the history of the United Nations Security Council has been passed. So that in and of itself was very, very significant. Now, it also was the first time that the room broke out into spontaneous applause upon the passage of a motion for a resolution in the Security Council since February the 14th, 2003. And you may remember that date not only for being Valentine's Day,
very well,
but for the famous day when the French Foreign Minister, Dominique Villepin, tried to dissuade America and Britain from going to war in Iraq. And he did so on the basis that the inspections have not finished and there is an alternative to this that will have unforetold consequences, in exactly the same way that the hostage negotiations have not finished and the invasion of Rafah and the subsequent slaughter could trigger revolutions and Armageddon all over the Middle East. We're in exactly the same situation. Okay. Now, when it was passed...
Now, before you go on, Simon, it is, or will be in a few seconds, 2043. So I, for one, cannot wait to hear the significance of the biblical number 43. Kindly segue into it.
You want me to do it now? But I must finish the sequence of events. So at this moment, on minute 43, 43 is the biblical number of contention. The number is written in Hebrew as Mem 40 and Gimel 3, which means water signifying a flow of history within time. And Gimel literally means a camel, but it signifies a position of authority or glorification. And throughout Scripture, we see the number 43 intertwined with men contending for positions of authority. The 43rd mention of Abraham, the 43rd mention of Abraham, the 43rd mention of Isaac, the 43rd mention of Jerusalem, the 43rd mention of Jesus, the 43rd mention of Peter, and the 43rd mention of Paul are all moments of crisis when something is in dispute, normally who is going to become the leader of the region or the known world. And it is only after a period of dispute then a resolution is agreed upon. And I will explain exactly how the events of Monday, Tuesday, going forward to the BRICS conference in Kazan are going to fulfill that. This may even be a fulfillment of prophecy, but I'm not going so far as to try and prophesize to your audience. I certainly wouldn't dare to do that. So when the motion was passed on Monday by a vote of 14-0, the Algerian ambassador gave an extremely dignified speech explaining why his nation had supported the draft resolution. And part of the way through it, he said, at this point, I want to give a message to the people of Palestine. And he literally choked up. He choked up. And he said, we have not forgotten you. And then he wiped a tear from his right eye, which people can see to verify on the UN website, on YouTube and the channel, and see that he actually did that. And then he reiterated, we have not forgotten you. And then he explained that the president of Algeria had told him that his next task as the representative of Algeria to the United Nations Security Council was to help ensure that Palestine became a full member that they had been tricked into not accepting 10 years ago by the US State Department. There was then a few more speeches, none of which were particularly significant. But immediately after they left the room, we started hearing that the representatives of the US government, both at the State Department and the White House, were indeed saying that it was a non-binding resolution. Now, that was put to the ambassador from Mozambique by a journalist who said in the press conference outside the Security Council chamber, where the E10 group all met after the Arab group had given their first take on the situation, including the foreign minister from Palestine. And somebody said, the Americans are saying this is non-binding, so were you wasting your time? It was a really cheeky, essentially racist question. And the ambassador from Mozambique, he literally grabbed the microphone and he said, I'm the ambassador from Mozambique. I drafted that resolution as the pen holder. I was a member of the International Legal Commission for 15 years, and I was its president for some time. And when drawing that up, I was very aware of the fact that this would be legally binding. It was a dramatic moment in history, right?
Very dramatic. I must say, your whole call call's been dramatic, but it's also been 7 minutes. So I need to call a halt and ask you to ring back again for your 44th call on Sunday. Please forgive me, Simon, in Florida. Norman Mackenzie Richmond says, why only 2 choices on the poll? What about the CIA? And the Risen People of Era says, Francesca Albanese report, anatomy of a genocide is damning, especially given the context of the ICJ ruling. And Noha Gatwan from Syria says, I send my greetings to you, Mr. George Galloway, and to you, ma'am. In a minute, it's my good wife, Gayatri. But first, Joseph in England, in Shropshire, on the ceasefire. Go ahead, Joseph.
Good evening, George. Again, congratulations. You are an MP.
Thank you, sir.
George.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You've previously introduced a few items around Gaza and the funding into Ukraine from UK, and this conversation I'm having with you right now is a suggestion around what should be happening is negotiation between the parties involved in these wars, or the Gaza war in particular, and the UN resolution, the UN arrangement to ask for a ceasefire. I think that the president of the Israel possibly may not consider the United Nations answer to a ceasefire in the same light as a NATO answer. Now, if NATO were to follow on with a vote for a ceasefire in Gaza, then I would have thought even the Israeli Prime Minister would be bound to follow that ruling. And so,
well, I mean, the NATO powers were represented in the vote. The United States abstained, did not veto. The United Kingdom voted for, having abstained the previous time. France voted for the resolution. The United States, United Kingdom, and France are the most important powers in NATO, 3 nuclear powers. And so I think there's little doubt that the Israelis got the message. And there's little doubt, even less doubt, that they have rejected the message. And so the question now is, what are you going to do about it? You're making yourselves an ass. The law is an ass. If little Israel, totally dependent for its money, its weapons, its political, diplomatic support, its public relations, its unlimited defense by the mass media in Western countries, if Israel can tell the big powers to go and stick it where the sun don't shine, then that just makes a mockery of the whole thing, at least in my opinion. Joseph in Shropshire, thanks for the call. Let's go to Gayatri live. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, you did it. We got a record poll tonight. Who was behind the Moscow attack? Who did it? And, you were implying that we were hijacked, at least on X, because everywhere else the conclusion was that it was not ISIS, including on Patreon. John C. says, the CIA and MI6 are definitely behind this heinous crime. And you know what happens when you poke a bear. And Bernsey says, Victoria Newland, the angel of death, gave the game away. And Scouser Lara, our friend in Liverpool, says, when the US says it was ISIS, you know it wasn't ISIS.
Well, you know it wasn't ISIS, but it's quite an interesting question as to who is ISIS. How did they come to be? How did this murder cult, death cult, come to be? And why are they so helpful to the United States in only attacking the United States' enemies. I mean, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, do you? I mean, Inspector Clouseau could work that one out, couldn't he?
Right, indeed. I got a message here about Assange from Lansford. He says, if 2,000 people show up at Belmarsh, they will be able to walk Assange out in a massive wave of freedom. The guards in Belmarsh will not shoot that many people. The crowd will have to bring cutting tools and keep the identity of the tool operator secret, but they will get him out. Not one thing will terrify the 0.0001% more. And with luck, when Julian is back telling the truth, the hedge fund oligarchs will not get their beachside mansions in Gaza. And this story reminds me, of course, of your son, who also had a plan in mind to free Assange at the time stuck in the embassy.
He did, yeah. My oldest son, Zain, when he was a little boy, when we used to go into the Ecuador embassy to visit Julian, actually drew a plan whereby Julian could escape over the roofs, down the pipes, along the sewers. I hope there's a statute of limitation. And he never actually implemented the plan, Inspector. So please don't hold it against him. I have a feeling that Julian's going to be in the dungeon of Belmarsh for the rest of this year at least. Whoever is the incoming president of the United States will then be under pressure to pardon him. I actually think this will end in a presidential pardon. But that's just a hunch. And it won't be a pardon from Joe Biden. That is for sure, because Joe Biden won't be the president after November. Anything else, Gayatri?
Yes, people were very moved and very upset and enraged, really, about the news that was revealed today about another $1.5 billion that the UK is donating towards Ukraine. The Flower Shed says, this is money laundering at its finest. And Pat Brisson says, when I hear of things like this, I read about the French Revolution and then I fantasize about what could be if we had the nerve. And Sylvester, the pastry chef, says, no votes, no nothing, no democracy over this decision, and nothing where it's needed at home. And I was very touched by all those testimonies of people describing their difficult lives here in the UK, in England, Scotland, Wales, the food banks. And there's one person who even said that there was a school nearby that offers 15 million, and yet there's all this money going to Ukraine.
And not just, I mean, all of that is powerful and of course true, but what is astounding, and it was you who first spotted this on social media today, what is astounding is that they're boasting about it with a cartoon, like an animation. They're so proud of it, they put it out in that form that we showed earlier, which means they think that the people of Britain will welcome it, which cannot possibly be true. Only the boys in the bubble can possibly welcome that when so many things desperately need funds in Britain. They think we're cheering because they sent another £1.5 billion to little Zelensky in Kiev. I'll see you after the show, Gayatri. I've got to squeeze one last call in, if you'll forgive me. Not many men can cut their own wives off, but at least we're in different rooms. Remember, don't forget now about the podcast. You can download this show as a podcast anytime you like. Just scan that QR code on your screen now. Last call is from Zahid in Manchester. Welcome, Zahid. You're the last call of the evening.
Hello, George. You okay?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you very much.
just wanted to say congratulations and thank you so much for your work, and really appreciate all of your efforts for the years that you've done what you've done. Unfortunately, there's not many people like you. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you so much, and it's an honor sort of listening to you and allowing you to tell us what's really happening and what's really going on out there.
How beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful call and message. Zahid will be fighting almost all, if not all, of the parliamentary seats in Manchester at the general election. A good friend of mine, Shabazz, is already running in the local elections in the Longsight ward. And I think we've got covered all the other Manchester seats, but maybe one or two. But the 7 Labour MPs in Manchester who remain friends of Israel, or as I call them, fiends of Israel, be sure the Workers' Party is coming for you. I've got only time for 30 seconds of comments. If I was in any doubt that the deep state, you know, the one that Prime Minister Liz Truss told us about when she was over in America a couple of weeks ago, conspiracy theorist, well, she was the British Prime Minister. She was brought down. So maybe she knows a thing or two about what she called the deep state. If I had any doubts that the deep state want you to believe that it was ISIS that carried out the mass murder in Moscow, the attempt to rig our poll, record poll, here on the mother of all talk shows this evening removes forever any doubt at all. Go figure, as the Americans would say. I'll be back, of course, God willing, on Sunday with the Mothership, the Sunday edition of the mother of all talk shows. Our guests will be as good as the excellent guests were this evening. What a lineup, what a show, what calls, what records are broken. It really is the mother of all talk shows.